Hey lighting people, today we're going to talk about recipes. I don't know anyone who uses MA3 recipes and doesn't absolutely love them, but if you're like me and it took you a while to get into MA3 recipes and you haven't yet made the jump to learn how they work, I'm going to show you everything you need to know about what they're actually doing and how to best use them. Recipes have been around in MA3 for a while. I think they've been around from the beginning, but what really made recipes stand out to me and when I started using them is actually with the latest update of MA3 version 2.2, when they added the recipe editor. That's this window right here, and it made everything so much better. The reason I didn't use the recipes before that is because it involved editing cells in a sheet. That was the only way to create them, and it was really time consuming. Now, programming in recipes is at least as fast as regular programming, and honestly, it gets faster if you do it right. First things first, we're going to start by creating a regular preset. I'm going to select my floor pixels, set the dimmer value to 100%, and store this in a regular preset. Now this, as you can see, is a selective preset as indicated by this red S right here. This tells me that this preset contains values specific to a certain set of fixtures. Now what this preset does not reference is a group. I used a group to select my fixtures, but this preset does not reference the group, it references the fixtures themselves. And it says put these fixtures at this value. Now I'm going to clear out and I'm going to create another preset. I'm going to use my air spots. I'm going to also set them at 100% and I'm going to store them in another preset. But before I store this, I'm going to go over here, long press store, and change the preset mode to global. Now, if I store here, my preset is stored with this little G icon, which tells me that this preset applies to a fixture type. So all fixtures of the same fixture type as these air spots can use this preset. Universal is similar but applies to all fixture types that contain that attribute. Now for good measure, I'm going to create another regular preset. I'm going to select my spots and my pixels and I'm going to store them at 80% and I'm going to make this one global as well. It's showing me the split view because it's trying to tell me that the lights are at different values, but they're actually at the same value. It just looks like a different value between the two fixture types, apparently. Now we're going to go ahead and create a recipe preset. A recipe is letting you define the ingredients that will go into a final product, and then swapping out any of those ingredients will still cook a final product for you, rather than our regular approach, which is just creating the final product from scratch every time, where you can't just change the recipe for a different outcome. It's like as if it lets you use some kind of crazy fancy cooking machine that just, you tell it what ingredients you want to use, and whenever you use that recipe, it instantly churns out the food with whatever ingredients the recipe currently says to use. If you give it a different recipe, it gives you a different end product, but it still always gives you something. So the ingredients that we're going to put into our recipes are selection, value, and a matrix. You can also add a filter and tags, but the basic things are take this selection, put it at this value, and use these a matrix to do it. The important thing is that unlike creating a regular preset, you have to select a group because the selection ingredient is actually the group object, not the fixtures, and the value ingredient is going to be a preset object rather than programmer values. Remember, a recipe is only a list of ingredients, not the actual ingredients themselves. So you have to get your list together, and then whatever is contained in those ingredients is what's going to be used to make the recipe. So to do this, we're going to toggle on edit recipe, and we can see this lights up with a green pot icon, and all of your preset pools and your groups pool will also light up with a green pot icon. This just tells you recipe editor is active. If you try to click on regular presets, they're not going to do anything like they do when you have recipe editor turned off. You cannot select fixtures with these. You can only select them to use them as a recipe ingredient. Now, in order to start your recipe, you have to start by selecting a group. So the group comes first. I'm going to select my floor pixels. It gets this green box around it, which just tells you this is currently selected. And then we're going to select this preset, and it sets the fixtures at that value, and it puts a green box around this. And we can see in the recipe editor, we have the selection here and the values here. And now we can store this in another preset. Just like with any other preset that's referencing a preset, it shows you the name of the preset it's referencing, shows you this icon telling you that it's 100% dimmer value, And it also has this pot icon telling you that this is a recipe preset. And if we click on edit setting, we can see the recipe lines in the preset containing the same data that they had before we stored it. We can always clear out, turn off edit recipe, and select this preset, and it's going to do the same exact thing as this one did, because the outcome of this recipe is setting these fixtures at this preset and thereby at this value, which is the same thing as just setting these fixtures at this preset. Okay, I'm going to do a little comparison between using recipes and not using recipes as far as workflow. I'm going to select this group, apply this preset, and change the fade time to 3 seconds. Now I'm going to store this in my Q1, and there it is. Now I'm going to do the same thing but using a recipe, so I'm going to turn on edit recipe, select all pixels, this preset. Now I'm going to change the fade time in the recipe editor by scrolling over here to fade from X and changing it to 3 seconds. Now I'll store that in Q2, and both of these Qs are going to have exactly identical output. We're going to put the lights at this value in 3 seconds. The second queue, as you can see, has a recipe icon showing that there is a recipe stored in this queue. And if you click on it, you can see the recipe lines down here, and we can see and edit all of this information directly in the queue. We don't even have to be on the queue to do that, which is really nice. Now, let's say after programming this, I suddenly decide, oh my goodness, that is not a long enough fade time. I actually need to change the fade time to 6 seconds for both of these queues. To do this in the first queue, I have to either go to the queue and then activate the dimmer and change the fade time, or if I'm not going to be on the queue, I have to select the fixtures, put them at the preset, and change the fade time to 6 seconds. Of course, I could also edit the queue, but there are multiple ways of doing this. Any of them is pretty time consuming. I'm going to store this back in the queue. Every single one of these methods is going to involve storing or updating the queue. Now for Q2, it's very simple. I just scroll over here and change this to 6 seconds. No updating required. It's already changed in the queue. When I go to the queue, it will fade in 6 seconds, as we can see here. So easy. Okay, another change I might want to make is now I decided I don't actually want to put all of my pixels at this value. I only want to put the floor pixels at this preset. So for the first one, I already have my floor pixels set to the value, but I have to remove the data from my vertical pixels. So I have to activate my vertical pixels and then store remove in Q1. Now for Q2, it's really simple. You just go in here to selection and change this to floor pixels. And now there is no data for the vertical pixels in the queue. The floor pixels are at the correct preset with the correct timing, but there was never anything in the queue for vertical pixels because we just removed it. Another scenario you might run into is wanting to change which preset the fixtures are referencing. In the first queue, as aforementioned, I have to select my pixels, change them to this other preset, change the fade time again back to 6 seconds, and store into Q1. With the second one, I just can scroll over here, select values, and change it to the preset I want. If I'm having trouble finding it, I can search preset 129. There we go. Now it's updated and we retained our matrix data. Being able to edit the recipe lines like this makes it really easy to compare data between different fixtures. If you need to change fade times for multiple groups, you can just do it all at once in the editor here rather than having to activate different things in the programmer. It's so easy. And always, an added benefit is that when you change something in a recipe line, you don't have to update it like when you change it in the programmer. It's just automatically updated in the queue. Now let's try something new. I'm going to select my vertical pixel bars and I'm going to try to create a recipe preset with them using the selective preset that I've already created for my floor pixels, but my vertical pixels don't have any data in here. Now, of course, we know that if we try to use a selective preset with fixtures that it doesn't have data for, in normal programming, it just doesn't work. It won't let you. But what about when we're using recipes? What happens? I'm going to try this. Vertical pixels, it's grayed out, but I select it, it populated a recipe line. And it's showing up as red. Now, the reason for this is because basically it's saying, okay, we're setting these pixels at this preset in the recipe, but we don't have this ingredient. This ingredient does not exist. If we store it in a preset, This preset shows us a recipe icon, but it's just named preset, not the name of this one, and it doesn't have the icon. The reason is because this preset contains a recipe line, but it doesn't actually have any data that we can use. If we right-click Edit Setting, obviously it's still showing up as red. And this preset therefore exists, but because the ingredients are missing, we cannot actually use it. Calling it will just not do anything. Now we can fix this. If we add the ingredient back, if we store values for these fixtures into this preset, then this one will work. Let's try that. I'm going to select my vertical pixels, put them at 100%, and store here. And now, voila, it works. Now this function of recipes is a reason why I prefer to store all of my base presets as either global or universal, and then I'll make selective recipe presets with whatever extra details I want specific to my specific looks. So basically, I create a whole bunch of global and universal presets for different values, and then I create recipe presets with all of my main groups. So I'll have a different recipe line for each group. I'll select my spots, my pixels, whatever other groups I have. I'll set them at the preset. I'll change in matrix values to whatever I use the most frequently. I'll make that my default, and I'll store that in a recipe preset. If my defaults change and I want to go change that, or I want to go quickly just see what it was, I can edit setting, I can go look at it, I can change it if I need to. It's great. And then I take that selective recipe preset and I use that again in recipes and store those recipes in my queues for my regular programming. And then if I need to change some in matrix values to be something different than the default, then I just do that. But to me, this makes a lot of sense to have global and universal presets as my main ones, and then my regular ones that I use the most have customized data stored selective into a recipe preset. Now, one of the best things about recipes, which I've talked about a little bit, sort of, is that it takes the group reference the same way it takes the preset reference. You can see that because these groups have been stored in recipes and they have this little icon. The ones that have been used to make these presets don't have that. So these groups are actually what's being referenced in the presets rather than the fixtures. We talked about that. Now, yes, that does make it so that you can just change out the group and things work, but the other advantage is that just like you can edit a preset and your queues get updated with the new values, you can also edit a group. And queues and presets using that group in a recipe will use the updated group rather than just the fixtures that were stored in the group when the preset was stored. So that way, if you go to a new location on your tour and you have more lights, you can store the updated group into your existing group that's used in your recipes, and it'll put the values over the whole group, and your matrix settings will still work because the matrix settings are fanned across the selection grid. So just make sure your selection grid is accurate and it will always look good. Another setting in which this can be useful outside of the touring world is how I've personally used it at my church. We had a whole bunch of pixel bars, some were in the air, some were on the floor, and we couldn't use the vertical ones as brightly as the ones on the floor because they were pointing straight at the audience, and the ones on the floor were pointed up more. One time, we moved all of the lights to the floor for a while. Now, instead of just having a whole bunch of my fixtures not as bright or changing all of my programming, all I had to do was restore my floor pixels group with all of the pixels in it. And then all of the values that I had stored for my floor pixels were fanned across all of my floor pixels that I now had. As always, play around with the recipe editor and various types of preset programming workflows and see what works best for you. There are a whole lot more tips and tricks that I could give you from my workflow, and I intend to do just that, but in my next video. So if you're interested in seeing my complete workflow, how I use recipes with phasers, a whole bunch more info about the recipe editor, and how using recipes made my programming workflow about 60% faster than it was before I started using them, make sure to check out that video in about 2 weeks. And hey, if you have any questions from this video, leave them in the comments and I'll be sure to get back to you. And if I missed anything that you would like to see, let me know and maybe I will work it into the next video or make another one about it. Thank you for learning with me today. I hope you had fun and will continue to have fun as you play with recipes and tailor them to your needs. Have a good week.